Break Fix's History of Motorsports series is brought to you in part by the International Motor Racing Research Center, as well as the Society of Automotive Historians, the Watkins Glen Area Chamber of Commerce, and the Argetsinger family.
My name is Tom Wiedemann, and I'm Executive Director at the Motor Racing Research Center. Today we're going to learn about the exciting 50 years of Formula One racing at the Canadian Grand Prix. In order of appearance, we're honored to be hearing from Lionel Birnbom and Tim Meddaugh. Lionel is a self-taught photojournalist of Ottawa, and he began attending motorsports events in the late 1950s. He was widely published in most major racing magazines and papers in Canada, Road and Track, Car and Driver, and Competition Press in the US, Autosport and Motorsport, and many other hardcover, softcover racing books, including both of Pete Lyon's Can-Am books. He recently self-published The Golden Years of Motorsport in Eastern Canada and the USA, a photographic journey from the late 1950s to the 1980s. It contains more than 2,100 photos.
Thank you, George, for an excellent presentation. And I would like to thank Glenda Gephardt and Tom Wiedemann of the IMRRC for inviting me to be a panelist on this prestigious discussion group celebrating 50 years of the Canadian Grand Prix. And I mentioned George's excellent presentation. As he indicated, many of the photos used in his discussion were photos taken by yours truly and published in Jerry Donaldson's excellent book, The Grand Prix of Canada, that covers the years 1967 to 1983. In fact, I'm very proud that of the 162 photos in the book, 50 were mine. I became interested in cars in the mid-1950s with the emphasis on sports cars and racing. Road and Track, Car and Driver, and Competition Press were the Bibles in those days. And I still have more than 50 years of each of Road and Track and Car and Driver, much to the chagrin of my wife, Melanie, in the audience. Born in Montreal, my developing passion in sports cars led me to the sports car clubs, and specifically the Montreal MG Car Club, as it was the most focused on organizing races. Not being able to afford to race, I quickly realized the next best thing to be in the thick of things was to become a racing journalist and photographer. It got me into the pits, as well as right up to the edge of the pavement of the track. Pure heaven, and I didn't have to pay for an entry ticket. After several years of writing letters to racing newspapers and magazines, a few editors began to say yes, and some of my photos and reports were eventually published. My career as a racing journalist and photographer was launched. However, this led to my next epiphany, that although I loved the sport, the cars, the people, and the travel involved in racing, the chances of earning a living from the sport were very slim. I therefore became a professional accountant, and it solved two problems at once. Namely, I could earn a steady, decent living and also afford to indulge my passion. Born in Montreal and having lived there for 36 years, I was acutely aware of the constant rivalry between Montreal and Toronto, or, more broadly, the provinces of Quebec and Ontario. Whether it was our NHL hockey teams, pro football teams, Major League Baseball teams, and of course sports car racing and the tracks. Once they took to a sport, the French Canadians of the province of Quebec were very passionate about it and the relevant excellent stars that they developed. This year we're marking the 50th anniversary of Formula One in Canada, and the first one having taken place in 1967. That year was also the 100th anniversary or centennial of the founding of Canada as a nation. The 1967 celebrations of that milestone included Expo 67, the World's Fair in Montreal that George mentioned many times, wall-to-wall festivals, parties, and unbridled joy and happiness throughout the city of Montreal. What a stark contrast to today's world. Mosport is located about 60 miles east of Toronto and was built in 1961, quickly became the leading purpose-built road racing track in Canada. In '64, it was Montreal's turn, and the construction of Le Circuit Mont Tremblant situated amongst the beautiful ski hills in the Laurentian Mountains, was built 90 miles north of Montreal. The 67 centennial as it approached, the topic in the sports car clubs and CASC, the Canadian governing body of the sport, was to get on the calendar of the World Championship or F1. What better time to have the first F1 in Canada than in its centennial year? The lobbying and politicking between Mosport and Mont Tremblant was fierce, and eventually the FIA granted the first ever Canadian Grand Prix for F1 cars to Mosport in 1967. Mont Tremblant would get the race the following year, and in theory the two tracks would hold the Grand Prix in alternate years. Reality and many factors soon set in, which George covered quite well, and unfortunately Mont Tremblant and Mosport faded out of the picture. This was the beginning years of my career as a photojournalist for racing and cars. A good friend of mine in Montreal was a chap called Bob McGregor, if not the first, possibly one of the very first to have a network show that went right across the country in Canada on radio. It was 30 minutes of sports car racing and news and car road testing every Monday at about 6:30 Monday night. He would have correspondents from throughout Canada, the States, and Europe reporting on all the major events. Bob, he called up Rolls Royce in Montreal one day and said, "I'd like to do a road test of your car. Can I get one?" Somehow they foolishly agreed. And that particular weekend, much to the chagrin of Rolls Royce, they didn't realize the car would be going to Watkins Glen for its US Grand Prix. About 50 miles out of Montreal, Bob invited me along for the ride, and I said, sure, why not? Bob got tired of driving it. He said, this is a pile of crap. Lionel, why don't you take the wheel? Sure, thank you. And I drove the rest of the way to the Glen, and as we were coming down Highway 14 from Geneva, I pulled over the side of the road. I said, Bob, I want you to get into the back seat on the passenger side. No, Lionel, I'm not. Bob, do it. He listened to me. He didn't know what I was going to come up with, but it was going to be some fun. The Glen Motor Court, as probably most of you know, is on the hill coming into town here in the Glen, and was one of the centers of F1 racing throughout the years. The teams would book it this year for next year, completely sold out a year in advance. I drove up in the driveway of the entrance to the Glen Motor Court, jumped out of the car, a gorgeous burgundy with the tan leather interior, and went around to the rear door, opened it for Bob to get out. For those of you that know it, there's a little bit of a driveway that comes in right at the front door of the office, and immediately next to it is a great big picture window of the office. Naturally, this car got a bit of attention as we rolled up, and my role of getting out and opening the door for Bob sort of enhanced it a bit. And he went into the office and said, I would like a room for tonight. Playing dumb that the Grand Prix was on that weekend, they fell over themselves apologizing that the place was full. They must have spent over an hour on the phone calling every available hotel, motel, B&B within 100 miles of here, and eventually found a place for us. We then drove into town, found a parking spot on Franklin Street, which was amazing, parked the car, and Bob took his tape recorder out, standing beside the car, doing radio interviews, and for some reason, the only people interviewed were these very cute, young-looking girls. Thank you, Rolls Royce. From there, this is the aerial view of Mosport in 1973 at the Can-Am, and you can see basically the outline of the track. And this is the Mont Tremblant aerial view, the actual inaugural Can-Am in '66. Now there's an interesting story to this aerial view. The promoters hired a helicopter for the press to take them up and take aerial views of the track. The pilot tried to be very obliging and took off the passenger door of the helicopter. As we lifted off, I'd never been in a helicopter in my life, but I said, wow, this is fantastic. He went around the track a few times and we're talking back and forth. He kept asking me where would I like to take the pictures from, where to shoot, how to position the helicopter. And he got to the end of the track and just hovered at the hairpin at the end and tilted the helicopter a good 30 degrees so I could take my picture. I was holding on to the frame of the doorless opening with one hand, my 2 feet braced against the dead pedals, and clicking away with the camera with my free hand. I'm very fortunate I don't have a fear of heights. This is Graham Hill, spun out in the wet, got out of the car, and started pushing it down the track, jumped in, and somehow got it restarted. An event in the rain that you'll never see today. The drivers in those days were very approachable. You could go up to the drivers, whether you're press or not. Nobody was a prima donna. This was an image right here in Watkins Glen at the old pits. Joe Bonnier on the left, Roy Salvadori on the right, and they were having a casual game of cards in between qualifying and practice and whatever. 1960. 61, the card game continues. You'd never see this today. John Surtees became one of my favorite people in motor racing. In 1965, John had a horrendous accident in a Lola T70, the pre-Can-Am car at Mosport. It was life-threatening. Miraculously, he recovered before the Formula One season started in 1966. And the inaugural Can-Am at Mont Tremblant was September of '66, a year after this horrendous accident. I was out as usual around the track shooting. My then wife was on top of the control tower at Mont Tremblant for VIP spectators and was standing next to another lady during this practice session and qualifying, and she just said, not knowing who this person was, "Isn't it wonderful to see John back in a car again?" The other lady turned to her and said, "Thank you." And my former wife didn't know what to take from that and said, "What do you mean?" "Well, I'm Pat Surtees." The rest of the afternoon, they conversed back and forth. And at the end of the afternoon, when I got back from shooting on the track, I came back to the pit area, met my former wife there, and she said, "I want you to meet somebody." That somebody turned out to be John Surtees. He was the most humble man, the most ferocious man behind the wheel, and yet he was a complete gentleman. And from that point on, every race that I went to that he was at, I made a point of going to say hello to him, whether it was a Can-Am, whether it was a Formula One, or anything else. Fast forward to 1987. My new wife, who's in the audience, and I decided we're taking a vacation trip to England. About a week or 2 weeks before that, it was one of these London show tours that you bought a week's package and everything was arranged. But we were going to add on about 10 days prior to that week of just touring around the countryside. I called up John. I said, "You probably don't remember me. I'm sure you see hundreds, if not thousands, of press people and photographers over the year, but I was at Mont Tremblant, Mosport, and Watkins Glen, and spoke to you quite often. We're coming over to England for a vacation. If it's at all possible, I'd love to stop by, have a cup of tea with you and my wife, and no photography, no story, no interviews, nothing, just a personal chat." He said, "By all means, give me a call when you land here, and I'll tell you what's going on for my day." An overnight flight from Montreal. We landed about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, got our rental car, fell asleep in a parking lot somewhere, and about 9 o'clock woke up and I called John. "We've arrived, we're here, we're at the airport. I'm tied up till 4 o'clock, he said, but please come by then," and he gave me the directions. John lived on a spectacular estate just out of London. I believe it was about 90 acres in total. All kinds of ponds with swans in them, and just an incredible, incredible place. He welcomed us as a real gentleman. We had a lovely chat. He said, "Would you like to see some of my toys?" Of course. And he took me over to one of the buildings beside his home that had, I don't know, about a dozen varieties of Ferrari, and I was just drooling all over every one of them. And then he said, "Oh, let's go to the next building." Open the door, and here's all his World Championship motorcycles. I was absolutely blown away that this man, this god in racing, would welcome me so openly and treat me so beautifully. We went back to the house and he explained that the oldest part of the house was from the 13th century and the newer wing was from the 15th century. He would love to have us stay overnight, but the guest suite is being renovated. But please come back when you're through your touring outside of London. Before you go to London, we'll invite you for dinner. I thanked him profusely. I said, absolutely, we would do that. And he said, by the way, I've arranged, since I couldn't put you folks up here tonight, there's an inn down the road, the Henry VIII Inn, a bed and breakfast. We got there, the place was amazing. Again, I thanked him profusely. We were ushered into the Anne Boleyn room, one of the 8 wives, I guess. Everything was wall-to-wall red velvet. It was mind-blowing. Went down for breakfast the next morning, had a lovely English breakfast. And we were ready to check out. I went down to the front desk. I said, I'd like to settle my bill. Oh, that's quite all right, Mr. Birnbom. Mr. Surtees has taken care of this. My jaw dropped to the floor. I just couldn't believe his hospitality. I don't claim or pretend to be a media star, but this was just overwhelming. We went and did our thing for the next 10 days, came back, called up John. I said, we're through touring, and if you'd like, we could come by. You suggested the possibility of dinner. He says, yes, we have it all arranged. Please come by. His formal dining room must have been 50 to 75 feet long, without exaggeration, longer, almost as long as the entire auditorium. And the table was the full length. He had set one place for himself and his new wife, Jane, who happened to be the nurse that nursed him through his recovery of the accident at Mosport. He was set up at the far end of the table and had Melanie and I set up at this end of the table. We all had a great laugh out of that. And then he moved the 2 place settings down and we had a wonderful dinner, wonderful chat back and forth. I was just overwhelmed. And this is the kind of driver and superstar in motorsport that I don't think exists today. These were truly the golden years. He was amazing. As a professional accountant, I am acutely aware that at the end of the day, dollars and the economics greatly impact each and every endeavor and eventually drive the direction of its development, no matter what it is. This fundamental concept was certainly true in our beloved sport a half-century ago, and still today. Notwithstanding all the enthusiasm for Mosport and Mont Tremblant, as the years unfolded, it became apparent that neither of those tracks were financially viable, nor could they meet the rapidly escalating costs of a Grand Prix weekend. Fortunately for us all, the municipal, provincial, and federal politicians, Montreal, the province of Quebec, and the federal people in Canada miraculously agreed on one thing, and the Canadian Grand Prix found a permanent home in Montreal in 1978. It is still held there today and will be into the foreseeable future. It has been reported that well over 100,000 spectators pay to see the race on race day in Montreal, and the week-long activities that go on and the parties and all the closed streets events in downtown Montreal generate some $90 million for the city's economy, numbers that neither Mosport nor Mont Tremblant could ever match. So I'm getting into some of the drivers in Canada, the manufacturers, the teams. A gentleman in Montreal called Peter Broker, who sold and manufactured performance exhaust systems for sports cars and sedans in the late 50s, early 60s, called the Stebro exhaust systems. And he built a Formula Junior called the Stebro Formula Junior. In those days, the Formula Junior specs were very close to the F1 of that season, and he did whatever mods he had to do, entered it here at Watkins Glen, was accepted. So really, this is the first Canadian-built Formula One car that ever raced. The next gentleman is Peter Ryan. His father had a hotel, a ski resort in the Mont Tremblant area way before the track was built. His father was from Philadelphia, Joe Ryan, an American. Peter was born in the States, but grew up in the Mont Tremblant area. He was a downhill ski champion and was incredibly fast, won many Canadian championships. And the year that the Olympics came up, there was a great controversy as to whether he could enter the Olympics as a Canadian or an American. Eventually, he didn't race in the Olympics and he turned to cars, fortunately for us. So Peter, in the early 60s, he had a Porsche 550 RS as his first toy that he drove around the twisties in Mont Tremblant. And the skiing helped him to feel whatever was under him that was on the edge of adhesion, and developed his control and his talent of the car enormously from that skiing exercise. He had the Porsche RS, then he got an RS 60. He had a tremendous dice with Roger Penske at Lime Rock. Roger then had a birdcage Maserati, and they had a tremendous dice the entire race. Roger won it. Peter was second. Roger invited Peter into the car for the flag victory lap. The sportsmanship was fantastic in those days. Peter then got a Lotus 19, came to Mosport before there was a Formula One, but they called it the Canadian Grand Prix. Sterling Moss was there in a similar Lotus 19. I believe the first year they call it a Lotus Monte Carlo. Pedro Rodriguez had a 3-liter Ferrari, a V12, and there was a number of other international stars. Peter won the race, beating Moss, put on an enormous show. His talent was fantastic. Colin Chapman heard about it and signed him up to have a season in Europe in the Formula Junior Lotus series that was just the developing stages for Formula One. Things went awry, and long story short, in one of the races at Reims in France, Peter was killed in that car. He would have been one of the first Canadian superstars without a doubt, but we lost him before we had a chance. The other people that have competed or been in Formula One, Bill Brack in the high back wing car, I believe it was a Lotus, competed 3 times in the Canadian Grand Prix, and they were all rent-a-rides. Epi Weitz was a rent-a-ride in one of the years and under the auspices of Team Canada. Al Pease, that George mentioned, had a ride in Formula One and didn't show too well. George Eaton, he bought a ride with BRM and he didn't show too much in his various years. Gilles Villeneuve's brother, Jacques, not his son, and he tried on, I think it was 2 occasions in the Arrows to qualify for the F1 in Montreal, and he just wasn't fast enough. But he did try. The last race at Mosport in 1977, and George mentioned this, Jody Scheckter won it in the Wolf. Walter Wolf, who was originally from Austria, made a fortune with oil drilling equipment before he moved to Montreal, became a car enthusiast that went on to building his own car. He bought up 60% of the Williams team that year, and the team that James Hunt was involved with was going out of business, so he bought up the assets of that, and that became the basis of the Wolf team. Here we are in Montreal, Gilles in the Ferrari and the Wolf behind, and I believe that's Kiki Rosberg, whose son Nico won the World Championship last year. Gilles Villeneuve in his younger days, very personable, very down-to-earth individual. He started his career on snowmobiles and snowmobile racing, and like Peter Ryan, he felt the edge of adhesion and control on ice and snow, and that brought him into 4 wheels. He started with a Formula Ford, and he immediately began winning races. Moved up to Formula Atlantic. He was fearless. Nobody would push him off the track. Nobody would gain an inch on him if he could avoid it. And he went on to bigger and better things and eventually Formula One. Jody and Gilles were teammates for Ferrari. They were the best of friends. Jody referred to him at his funeral in the eulogy as one of the fastest racing driver in the history of motorsport. He was absolutely adored in Quebec. He grew up in Montreal, or just east of Montreal in Birchierville. The next year in Montreal, Alan Jones won the race, and they had a fantastic race. There was no trying to push anybody off the track. Good, clean racing, wheel-to-wheel racing. Alan won it, and he wanted to hold Gilles' hand up to say he deserves a lot of the applause as well. Great friendship, great sportsmanship. Gilles never gave up, never quit. He would just keep going. He'd beat the hell out of a car. He'd extract the absolute best you could ever get out of a car, and this is what made him such an amazing driver. And young Jacques, his son, that later got into Formula One and actually won the World Championship. Of the 40,000 images I have in my historic collection, this without a doubt is my absolute favorite. Gilles winning, his hands up, the flag, the banner, the crowd behind, and I must admit that I had a bit of an input into how the picture was put together. I went to the flag marshal about 5 or 10 laps from the end, and it looked like Gilles was pretty certainly going to win it. I said, look, don't start waving the flag when he's a half mile down the track. I want you to time it so that you just about hit him over the head with the checkered flag as he crosses the finish line. I went down about a couple of 100 feet from the finish line, got right up at the guardrail, pushed people out of the way. I didn't give a damn. I was going to get this picture. It's my absolute favorite. It's been on magazine covers. It's in my book. It just tells the whole story. And now we'll go to just some wrap-up pictures. A very early portrait of Jim Clark, phenomenal racer. You could see the difference in the helmets, the face goggles, the so-called driving suit. I don't even know if it was fireproof in those days. This is about 1960 or 61. Here is Bruce McLaren in one of his early races. This is an overhead of Jackie Stewart in the BRM, and this was technically called an H16, I believe was the designation, a 16-cylinder motor. This was a race at Mont Tremblant, one of the double-winged, split in the middle and flexible, and that's the smaller front wing. And this was the only split wing in the rear, I believe. The strut went right down to the suspension member on both sides, whereas the other ones would go straight to the frame. And what that did, as the rear suspension on one side moved, half of the rear wing could move in the same direction. The double wing cars and the high wings were gone the next year, but for the techies, I guess they love that kind of picture. Jackie Stewart in his earlier days, in his famous cap. Jackie Ickx winning the event at Mont Tremblant. Denny Hume. This was the start of one of the races at Mosport. I forgot to mention that with Gilles. I happened to be up in the press room and was watching as they came around this almost 90-degree turn onto the pit straight. Gilles was in a Formula Atlantic pre-F1 days, and he lost it. And as Sterling Moss said, you don't know if you're going fast enough until you lose control of the car, and then you'd know you've gone over the line. Gilles would test that just about every race, every day. He lost it coming around onto the pit straight. This was not a wall at that time. It was just a barrier dividing the track from what was the pits just behind it. And I looked down at the track, and Gilles came around, did a complete 360, and was backing into the barrier dividing the track from the pits. And I was looking down at him, and I saw his hand grab the shift leader. Before he stopped rolling backwards, he had it in first gear. He glanced down the track to see if anybody was coming, let the clutch out, and went screaming down the track. I don't think that entire episode lasted 2 to 3 seconds, but it's been burned in my memory ever since. What he could have done, and the timing was just phenomenal. Colin Chapman on the left, and Ken Tyrrell chatting in the pits very casually, two superstars, very well-known people. Roger Penske and Mark Donohue, what an amazing pair that just had the most incredible marriage in terms of the driver, the car, the team owner, and what they could do together. Then we have the first and only six-wheel car ever to race, the Tyrrell. I believe that was Patrick Depailler at Mosport. He's just coming into the pit lane. James Hunt, I was experimenting with some very tight close-up shots as they whizzed by and panning with the camera, even with the good speeds of the lens in those days. Sometimes I was on with the focus, and sometimes I wasn't, more often than not. But this time I was on, and it's a beautiful picture. Niki Lauda in the Ferrari, Alan Jones in the Williams, but that's one of the enormous sculptures that was on the site in Montreal at Expo 67 and was there for a long time. I'm not sure if it's still there or not. 79 in Montreal, Alan Jones won the race. and went on the victory lap with the flag. This is a picture I enjoy, not because he wrecked the car, but René Arnoux in the Renault Elf stuffed it into the guardrail, got out and started walking away, and I just caught that expression on his face. Oh my goodness, what have I done? My French is lousy. Unfortunately, this picture doesn't show everything except the drag strip that's going down pit lane at Mont Tremblant, and it says happy motoring. And that is my presentation. Thank you. And now I'll introduce Tim, and it's his turn.
Okay, turning to Tim. Tim was a pit and paddock marshal as well as a flagger for 4 years of Mosport. He then worked as a flagger at every station in Montreal until his last race in 2012. Overall, he has worked at 65 Formula One races in Canada or the United States, including the first United States Grand Prix at Austin in 2012.
Since I came back from Germany in 1967, I flagged for the first Canadian Grand Prix. I went up intentionally just as a spectator because I'd only got back into the United States the Friday before. So I missed the U.S. Grand Prix that year because I was mustering out at Fort Dix. I got up to Canada and bumped into the paddock marshals. The one in charge knew me from Europe and invited me to be a paddock marshal for the weekend. Sure, why not? At that time, they were called Perry's Merry Men, and I got to look after the Ferrari team for the weekend. Good start. Didn't know anything about that part of racing. At that time, I'd driven race go-karts when I was a kid and did a lot of high-speed stuff in Germany, but I had the opportunity to get involved. Following year, they'd gone to Saint-Gervais, did Perry's Merry Men for that one again. But in the meantime, I'd become a flagger in the U.S. I did 2 years as a paddock marshal, and then I flagged all the rest of the races at Mosport. I actually flagged every station at Mosport, too, in different categories. In F1, I worked Station 2, the day Ernie Strong and James Hunt thing happened, and Station 2-3 is where it happened. James Hunt was upset because he had been punted off. He didn't go off on his own. He was helped. And James wanted to punch out the helper. And that's when Ernie Strong tried to grab him and prevent him from doing that. James just came around and knocked Ernie down, and I kind of just chuckled. I said, Ernie, you weren't paying attention. That turn is a blind, hellish turn. You go through two and drop down, you go into no man's land, and in 6-hour racing up there, there had been a few fatal accidents where somebody went over the hump, went all the way out to the guardrail, which was almost 150 yards away, and still got killed. I've been involved in an awful lot of that type of thing in my years. In the early era of racing that we're talking about at Mosport, we were losing 2 drivers and 2 flaggers every year. And that was basically all of the late 60s, early 70s, all the way through almost to the end of the 70s. That ratio was keeping up throughout the world, you know. I mean, it was a dangerous game, but I still loved it. Maybe I'm not all here, but taking risks, doing that type of danger is the only reason I wanted to work Formula One. And it's the only reason I've done 65 Formula One Grand Prix as a flagger. 2 as a paddock marshal, 1 as an intelligent observer, somebody that's helping corporate. That wasn't in Canada. After Mosport, we went to Montreal, and I don't remember when these bibs started, but I have 10, 11, 12, and I know I've got a lot more, but they're not stored in any particular order. All the ones I brought, these are Canadian. The reason we got these, those numbers, the TV camera can pick them up very easily. So if you do something bad, you're never coming back. And you might even be fined or kicked out of Canada. We had one flagger that picked up a piece of a car at an accident scene. It wasn't a valuable piece, it wasn't worth anything, but he was asked to leave Canada and never come back. These bibs serve a purpose, and it's not what you'd think. Sitting here, I realize, even though this is a aerated fabric, they're hot. Now that I think about it, I remember that from wearing them, that no matter how good your flag suit was, and of course I flagged with full Nomex, that's hot, but you put this on and it's even hotter. I did every race in Montreal up through 2013, except for the one year that the two Canadian governing bodies couldn't get along, and they decided that they were going to hire flaggers from off the street in Montreal. And all of us real flaggers got a free grandstand seat at the grandstands that had just been built inside the hairpin. Those grandstands are now, people have to order the tickets a year in advance or more to get them, because that's a very valuable seat. The ones around the outside, they're valuable, but nothing like the one on the inside. The only people in that side of the grandstands were QRFA flaggers, the people that normally would have been flagging. The Formula One drivers were well aware of the situation, so they would only rely on the blue flagging that was being done from the grandstands in that turn. The rest of the track, they just took it easy that year. They weren't going to make any mistakes. They weren't going to do anything that would risk getting hurt, because they knew there was nobody looking after them. Didier Pironi was still the head of the GPDA at that time, and he stopped in the morning warm-up and got out of his car and came over and stood and waved to the flaggers in the grandstands, because he knew that's where we were. He just wanted us to know that he knew we were there and he was going to pay attention to us. It was a good feeling. Formula One drivers are far and away the most observant to work with. These bibs, some of them are chief deputy post or chief post. But this is blue flag marshal. That's actually the most important flagger in the business. The chief post is important because he's running the station, but the blue flagger is the one who saves the driver's life. He's the first one to go to a crash. We see it coming, developing. We know it's going to happen right there, because we're the ones looking into the driver's eyes as they're coming into our turn, where most everybody else in the turn is panning, watching traffic go by. We're concentrating on the eyes of the cars coming at us and the cars behind them, and we're listening so we know where every car is. A good blue flagger knows where every car is on a racetrack all the time. There are a lot of blind turns, especially at Montreal. 4A, 5, 6, 7 complex. Coming down at the back straight, it's where there's been several accidents over the years. You only get to see the car that you're going to blue flag for 4.3 seconds. In that amount of time, you have to know where the car is that just came out of 4 or is by 4A that's enough faster to where he's going to lap this guy coming into 6. So you don't have much time to do this. You don't really see the cars. You have to hear them. You have to know who's who. And when they start pit cycle, you have to pick up on all the pit cycles. Luckily, now they do give the blue flagger a radio. When they first started giving blue flaggers information, they would say blue flag 18. We don't know car numbers. You can't see car numbers on the Formula One cars up until 2 years ago. They finally put numbers on the front of the car to where you can actually see the number. We just know the helmets and the car. We get a cheat sheet which has the picture of every car and every helmet, and we memorize that. Because there's only 22 cars. We can handle 22. All right, with the Gilles race that Villeneuve won, that was fairly a dry race. The next year was an awfully wet race, and Gilles was driving for Ligier and ran away and hid. We were still running on the original, the first track, before they changed and put the casino in. When they put the casino in, 2 turns changed drastically. There was a chicane at the beginning of it. The elevation changed up to where the casino was, and then the drop down and the right-hand turn after that were gone. They were really the two nicest turns on the track. They were artful turns, going up a hill, down, and they were gone because of the casino. Gilles did that race, the whole race, in a pouring rainstorm. It was still September, October, so it was cold, like 43 degrees. It was really neat because I was working that station, which at that time was, the hook at the bottom was Station 3, because the old start-finish used to be where 12 is now. They had one year where they had an endurance race. I've never gone up for the NASCAR ones they ran there, but they were in the wet. You know, watching it on TV, they were great races, because NASCAR doesn't race in the rain, and they proved they could. But I've worked every station at Montreal. As you go through most of those turns, it's a chicane to a straightaway, chicane to a straightaway, chicane to a straightaway. The speeds coming into the last turn before start-finish, if you watch it on TV, what the car is doing when he makes up his mind to go in the pits or stay on the race course, they're at 182 miles an hour. They make that chicane at 65. If they want to go in the pits, they can go straight into the pits at 98 until they get past the speed drop point, where they have to be down to 75, which is race day speed in the pits. Earlier, on Friday and Saturday, pit speed is like 35 or 40, depends on how they set it. They program the car so the driver just pushes a button that he's going into the pits. When he pushes that button, it almost turns the engine backwards to stop it. The driver doesn't have to use much brakes. It just stops itself. The fuel filler comes up when they were doing fueling. As soon as he hit that button, down the car goes, and up comes the door. Now, of course, they're back to real racing where they run the full race on 57 gallons of gas, as opposed to when they were refueling, they never carried more than 35 at the most. You know, that's extra weight. But you think about them today, they start the race with 57 gallons of fuel, 57 times 8. By the end of the race, that car has lost 300 pounds. So that's why the fastest laps are always set right near the end. And who's going to do it? Kimi Räikkönen always does it. He's the best at waiting till the car is light to get the maximum out of it. But he almost always sets the fastest lap of a race. He doesn't win any races because he's not allowed to. He's number 2 man on the team. And that's Formula One. Let's see, what else do we know about Mosport? I've been there for several bad accidents you don't like to think about, but it comes up every once in a while. Somebody wants to talk about an accident that happened at the start. I'm well versed in it. Didier Pironi was the pole setter, and Riccardo Poletti was the unfortunate who was dead last on the grid and couldn't see the waved hands from Pironi. Blew his clutch on the start, and he's waving his hands. Everybody else could see it, but the person way at the back trying to follow, that shut us down for an hour and a half. Those type of things happen in racing. But anymore, it's been a long time. The day that Senna was killed, I was working one of the last nationals at Bridgehampton. We had, I think, 4 last nationals at Bridgehampton before it finally stopped. That was Formula One's last real fatal until 2 years ago when the guy ran into the cherry picker that was out moving a vehicle. And they were under a full course caution when he did it. He obviously forgot where he was or what was going on, and it's too bad. We lost a good young man. We have to be there within 12 seconds, because if the car's on fire, you've only got 12 seconds to save his life. That fire chute is only good for 12 seconds in a 57-gallon fuel tank. Gasoline burns pretty hot. At least we can see it. Unlike Indy cars, where you can't see the flame, there you can only look for white driver suits that turn brown, or you look for the heat wave. Then you know things are bad. But as Sterling Moss said over here one year when we had the legends speak, he said racing is too safe today. People don't realize how dangerous it really is. And as someone who's been very close to the danger all these years and picked up too many pieces, I still love the sport. And I love it the way it is meant to be. And I'm sure some of you have some questions.
I'm trying to remember the year in Montreal that Bobby Rahal drove, and it had an incident on Friday and damaged his car. The team had a car that was an older car on display downtown in a shopping mall or a hotel lobby, and they had to go get it. And he raced that car. They worked all night.
I didn't have to go bail him out, so it wasn't my problem.
I was probably there. I think I've heard the story now that you mention it, but I have no idea what was behind it.
Did he race twice there or just once? Maybe it's 79.
Definitely once.
Yeah.
And again, I'm hazy on this.
It was with Walter Wolf.
78, because the results I showed,
Yeah.
down on the field there.
Yeah, it was one of those 2 years, but the car was damaged heavily, and they had a display car in, I think it was a hotel lobby, and they had to go get it and truck it out to the track and change the motor and put a transmission in it, and they worked all night to get him to qualify.
It was on display at the museum, 80 miles up the river, so they had to run to the museum and grab it.
What do you think of the updates at Mosport last couple of years? Guardrails, moving the media center over the wall, the other side of the track, the extension of the pit lane, moving the victory lane circle.
As you mentioned, the control tower is now on the outside of the last turn. The presentations are way off at the end of the paddock near turn 1. Turn 2 that goes down and drops off Camber and continues up the hill, if you get through that part of it, has a huge runoff now. The S's coming into the final 90 degree onto the pit straight has been opened up tremendously for people that don't survive the S's. There have been a number of changes. All came around the S's, and it's a left-hander before you do the right-hander onto the pit straight. His back end came around, and he was 90 degrees faced to the guardrail, right where the tunnel was. And I have a picture, it was way out of focus, but I have this little tiny image going straight up in the air as if it was launching. The car went over the guardrail and landed upside down beside the tunnel. He survived with, I think, a broken arm. But that tunnel is now widened to 2 cars wide. It used to be 1, and there was one-way traffic at that time.
My comment, for the first part of your question, the new ownership built new buildings on the outfield side across from the pits. That's primarily for hospitality. Decided that they would make one of the rooms function as a media room. And I know this is inside baseball, but for you and I, it's a disaster. You can't see anything, hardly at all. The PA people are there, they can't see anything. If you're going to report on the race other than just off the television screens, you have to get across the little bridge over into the paddock. The podium is another half mile away. It's just a disaster. I'll not give it any other adjective. I think as a hospitality thing, probably good. But whoever designed that didn't have a clue when it came to dealing with media. But that's inside baseball. That's you and me.
I listened to my answer about where the car came from when Ray Hall had the practice crash. I think I'm mistaken. It wouldn't have been a Wolf car in Villeneuve's museum. I'll get back to you.
Did any of you either have conversations at all with Mark Donahue through the years?
Many times. Mark used to teach driver's school for us up here with the Glen Region SCCA. He was our open wheel instructor. And so I had a lot of talk with him at various times. I had talk with him at Seneca Lodge over breakfast a couple of times. He was a very knowledgeable, nice engineer. He didn't understand my theory of full cantilever suspension when I told Tim Mayer how to do it, and he built a car and put Mark in it, and Mark says, "Oh, that's too complicated. We don't have time to figure that out." And that was Mark's only drive for McLaren at Mosport.
I think it's 71.
Yeah, but he didn't understand the full cantilever suspension, so he put back on the old.
There were a lot of people who were confused about the developments of suspension. The Lola was a disaster, which was also because of its suspension.
But I'm the one who gave it to Tim Mayer.
It sounds like we could really go on for hours, and we're going to, but let me thank these wonderful gentlemen for a terrific presentation. And invite you all to join us back over at the Research Center, where our staff member Sam Baker has prepared some refreshments for you. And these guys will be available for more questions. Thanks very much.
This episode is brought to you in part by the International Motor Racing Research Center. Its charter is to collect, share, and preserve the history of motorsports, spanning continents, eras, and race series. The center's collection embodies the speed, drama, and camaraderie of amateur and professional motor racing throughout the world. The center welcomes serious researchers and casual fans alike to share stories of race drivers, race series, and race cars captured on their shelves and walls and brought to life through a regular calendar of public lectures and special events. To learn more about the center, visit www.racingarchives.org. This episode is also brought to you by the Society of Automotive Historians. They encourage research into any aspect of automotive history. The SAH actively supports the compilation and preservation of papers, organizational records, print ephemera, and images to safeguard, as well as to broaden and deepen the understanding of motorized, wheeled land transportation through the modern age and into the future. For more information about the SAH, visit www.autohistory.org.
We hope you enjoyed another awesome episode of Break Fix Podcast, brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Grand Touring Motorsports. And if you'd like to learn more about the content of this episode, be sure to check out the follow-on article at gtmotorsports.org. We remain a commercial-free and no annual fees organization through our sponsors, but also through the generous support of our fans, families, and friends through Patreon. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can get access to more behind-the-scenes action, additional pit stop minisodes, and other VIP goodies, as well as keeping our team of creators fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. So consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without you, none of this would be possible.